Let's take a deeper look at reading comprehension in the GMAT. I'm convinced that the primary skill here is how to read the passage, or rather, how to comprehend the passage. If we understand the passage well, then most questions are pretty straightforward. But what does it mean to understand the passage well? RC requires a more critical kind of understanding than the kind we use for reading emails, news articles, or social media. One key here is engagement. If we're really engaged in the passage, then we're going to understand it better. I'd like to show you what goes on inside my head as I read a passage. For this video, I've used the 3 passages from the official starter kit from MBA.com. Here's the first passage. You may want to pause the video now to read the passage for yourself before I demonstrate. Let's begin. 2 recent publications offer different assessments of the career of the famous nurse Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale, yep, sure, I heard about her at school. Nurse, Crimean War, something like influential. And we've got 2 publications, I guess books, about her. The first book is by A.S. and it seeks to debunk the idea. What does that mean? Like, it seeks to kind of take down Florence Nightingale, sort of anti-Nightingale. According to her, okay, some evidence to support her position. Nightingale's importance has been exaggerated. Okay, so Nightingale sort of was overrated, I guess. We've got some more, additionally, more evidence. She writes, okay, so she didn't actually do much in the way of contribution, and the problems of military medicine were caused by the army practices, and the addition of a few nurses could be no more than symbolic. Okay, so just clarifying that Florence Nightingale didn't really do much after all. And her fame is kind of what she went viral in the newspapers, but actually wasn't such a big influence after all. Okay, first paragraph. So that's Summers is kind of anti-Florence Nightingale, I guess. By contrast, okay, so we've now got a change. And what about that other publication? I guess we're going to hear that. Perhaps it's going to be a different assessment. So we have the editors of a new volume of Nightingale's letters view Nightingale as a person who significantly influenced. Okay, so this is kind of pro-Nightingale, the other side from AS, and they highlight, okay, they give some evidence, her ongoing efforts to report the conditions. For example, okay, more evidence, something about the barracks and the conditions being pretty bad in those days. She used sums raised through public contributions, right? So she kind of, I don't know, did a sponsored something to raise money to found a nurses. Okay, that does sound pretty influential. And then even in administrative matters, okay, more evidence. Her intelligence was formidable. Okay, this is really pro-Florence Nightingale, and they still used whatever the system. Okay, so we've got the second paragraph is about the other side. The editors of the new volume are kind of pro-Nightingale. I believe. Third paragraph, okay, this means the author is stepping in with some kind of opinion. Which side are they going to be on? That the evidence of her letters supports continued respect for her brilliance. Okay, so they're definitely pro-Nightingale. They're kind of on the same side as the editors. And okay, some more evidence for this. She sounds like a modern educator. I guess that's a good thing. Her insistence on classifying the problems. This is kind of modern social workers. So she was kind of ahead of her time. In some, a conclusion coming up. Okay, it sort of repeats the same idea that Nightingale was a really positive influence. In conclusion, we've got 3 paragraphs. The first is AS is anti-Florence Nightingale. Then we've got the editors, they're pro-Nightingale. And then the author comes in on the side of the pro-Nightingale. How was that? What did you notice me doing? Was there any difference between the way that you'd usually read a passage and what I did? I should emphasize at this point that there's no single correct way to read a passage. But if we're going to improve, we need to change and experiment. Are there any moves that you'd like to steal? You might have noticed me asking some questions as I read the passage. Can you remember what they were? Pause the video now and consider. I describe my approach as dynamic reading. What I mean by this is that I have a conversation with the passage as I read. Just as when somebody explains something to me in real life, I don't just sit there passively. I respond to them. I check my understanding and I ask questions. I can do something similar with RC. Here are the most common questions that I ask. What did that say? I clarify what I've read by restating it in simple language. For example, in that passage I used the terms pro-Nightingale and anti-Nightingale to clarify the positions of the writers. How does that fit? I connect what I've read with the rest of the passage and with the topic in general. Notice that in that passage we had some critical reasoning. The structure was actually pretty simple. It was some opinions supported by some evidence, very much like what we see in critical reasoning. I also connect it with the topic in general, and this is a little bit of a delicate matter because I don't want to bring too much of my own knowledge to distort what I'm reading. But on the other hand, a little bit of general knowledge, a little bit of background about the topic does help my engagement, and I think the GMAT rewards that. What's next? I predict what's coming up in the rest of the passage. And it doesn't matter if my predictions are correct or not. The act of predicting helps my engagement and helps me look for clues as I read the passage. Let's look again at the same passage to see how that worked. I focused on some key words that help me ask the most useful questions. Often these are important terms, I've put them in blue, structure words in orange, and opinion words in purple. At the beginning I asked, what's the passage about? I saw it's about Florence Nightingale, I made a connection to my background knowledge, and then the mention of the two publications meant that I'm ready to identify what these two publications are. The fact that they're different suggests we're going to have some kind of controversy here. AS seeks to debunk. This told me that her opinion is anti-Nightingale, that was my simplification, and that she's at odds. There's again a contrast with the conventional opinion. According to Summers, we've got more about her opinion, and this is some evidence that AS is putting forward. Additionally, told me that there's some more information in the same direction coming up. This is all more argument by AS, some more evidence to support her opinion that Florence Nightingale was overrated. Summers asserts is another opinion phrase, really repeating what we've already read. In summary, the first paragraph was AS opinion and her evidence. By contrast is a structure phrase telling me that we're going to have a change of direction. Likely we're going to have the second publication. A key term here, the new volume of her letters. This is the other side, the second publication, and view is an opinion word telling me that we have a pro-Nightingale position. Here we have some evidence to support the pro-Nightingale position, and likely we're going to have some more evidence. For example, tells me that there's going to be some details coming up. Perhaps I don't need to get this on the first read, but it's all going to be pro-Nightingale evidence. Something about the Royal Commission, perhaps less important. Finally, summarizing the second paragraph was the pro-Nightingale position and their evidence. These are editors of the letters. I believe was an important opinion phrase telling me that the author is stepping in with their own opinion. I could anticipate that it's either going to be pro-Nightingale or anti-Nightingale or perhaps somewhere in the middle. It turns out that the author is pro-Nightingale, so that means on the same side as the editors. Here we have some evidence to support the author's position. In sum tells me that there's going to be a conclusion coming up, likely a repetition of what we've read already. So the final paragraph told us the author's opinion, and that was a pro-Nightingale one. In conclusion, after my first read, I've paid attention to the opinions, not only of the author, but maybe other people, the structure, the 3 paragraphs, and also the author's purpose. That means what the passage is trying to achieve. Here, I guess it's to review the 2 books and evaluate their contents. That will prepare me for the general questions I might see, but it'll also help me if I have detailed questions to know where to come back to in the passage. Again, here's the approach of dynamic reading. I engage with the passage and simplify, connect, and predict as I read. Here's another passage for you to practice on. Perhaps pause the video now and read it yourself before listening to my demonstration. Let's begin. A meteor stream is composed of dust particles that have been ejected from a parent comet at a variety of velocities. Okay, so wow, this is something about space, something about comets, and I guess comets leave behind dust. Have I seen a picture perhaps of that in a book? Yes, comets kind of leave a trail behind them. These particles follow the same orbit as a parent comet, but due to different velocities, they slowly gain on or fall behind. I don't know how they could gain on the comet, but anyway, until a shroud of dust surrounds the entire cometary orbit. Okay, so I guess if the comet is going round around the same sun, then it's going to have a kind of leave a continual trail in its orbit that gets more and more spread out. Is that like the wake of a boat? Astronomers have hypothesized, okay, opinion coming up here, that a meteor stream should broaden with time. Okay, yes, like spreading out, that makes sense, as the dust particles' individual orbits are perturbed. What is that? Perturbed means like interfered, I guess, by planetary gravitational fields. So yes, the dust sort of spreads out more and more. A recent computer modeling experiment, okay, what did that find out? Tested this hypothesis by tracking the influence of planetary gravitation over a projected 5,000 year, that seems like is that a long period? I suppose, maybe not, on the positions of a group of hypothetical dust particles. Okay, so what did this computer model find out? In the model, particles were randomly distributed, blah, 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 through the actual meteor stream, the Geminid. I'm not sure I've heard of that one. The researcher found, interesting point coming up, as expected, that the computer model stream broadened with time. Okay, so the dust sort of spreads out. Conventional theories, however, okay, a contrast with this, predicted that the distribution of particles will be increasingly dense towards the center of the meteor stream. Okay, like a sort of trail around the orbit, I guess. Surprisingly, something interesting coming up, the computer model gradually came to resemble a thick-walled hollow pipe. Well, that's kind of random. So the dust is a sort of a long pipe sort of shape around the orbit. How surprising. Okay, next paragraph. What's that going to be about? Whenever the Earth passes through a meteor stream, okay, so something about the reality or the interaction of the Earth with the meteor stream, a meteor shower occurs. Okay, I think I've heard of this. Yes, we have like shooting stars and stuff, don't we? Moving a little over 1.5 million miles per day around its orbit, the Earth would take on average just a day to cross the hollow computer model Gemini stream. Okay, so it's crossing the pipe, I'm guessing. 2 brief periods, that makes sense, yeah, like entering and exiting of peak meteor activity during the shower would be observed, one as the Earth entered the thick-walled pipe and one as it exited. That makes sense. There is no reason why the Earth should always pass through the center of the stream, so the time interval between the 2 bursts would vary from one year to the next. Okay, that makes sense. So I guess this is about the interaction of the Earth, but what actually happened in reality? Is it going to tell us, was the computer model correct or not? Has the predicted twin peak activity been observed for the actual Geminid meter? Yes, here we have it, the crunch time for the computer model. The Geminid data between 1970 and 79 shows just such a bifurc. I don't know what that means, but I guess bi is kind of 2 things. A secondary burst of meteor activity being clearly visible at an average of 19 hours after the first burst. Right, okay, yeah, so that kind of supported the computer model. The time intervals between the bursts suggest the actual Gemini stream is about 3,000 years old. In conclusion, this passage has 3 paragraphs. The first one is all about the comets. I didn't get all the details there, and the computer model. Then the second was about how the Earth interacts with the meteor streams. And then the third, that was really important, saying that actually the computer model turned out to be more or less accurate. So the purpose of the passage seems to be mostly discussing or describing or perhaps reporting some of these findings. The author didn't really have much of an opinion, although there was a bit of evaluation of the computer model going on. Here are those dynamic reading questions again. For science passages like the one I just showed you, I place a lot of emphasis on simplifying things. I keep in mind that I'm not meant to be an expert in the subject. Important terms and ideas will be explained to me. I'm also ready to skip over complicated details and come back to them later. But I try at least to get the framework of the passage. I'm going to show one more passage. Perhaps pause the video and read it yourself before listening to my demonstration. Let's begin. The modern multinational corporation is described as having originated when the owner-managers of 19th century British firms carrying on international trade were replaced by teams of salaried managers organized into hierarchies. Phew, okay, something about history and something about business. So the owner-managers of 19th century firms, I guess, is that the kind of big fat factory owner? They were replaced by teams of salaried managers. I guess that's kind of the more professional, the MBAs stepping in to replace the sort of rich entrepreneurs. Although actually it seems to be going back to rich entrepreneurs now that we have, you know, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos sort of owning their own companies. What's next? Increases in the volume of transactions of such firms are commonly believed to have necessitated this structural change. Okay, so the firms got too big to be run by one person, and they needed a kind of professional manager class. That makes sense. 19th century inventions like the steamship and the telegraph, by facilitating coordination of managerial activities, described as key factors. Okay, that's kind of technology. So technology allowed the firms to grow and have a more kind of management hierarchy. 16th and 17th century, well, how are they relevant? Chartered trading companies, I don't know what those are, I guess they're sort of earlier companies, despite the international scope of their activities, are usually considered irrelevant. Okay, are usually considered. That means that maybe the author is going to disagree with that later. So these 16th, 17th century companies, what about them? The volume of their transactions is assumed to have been too low. They were just kind of too small, and the communications and transport of their day too primitive to make comparisons with modern multinationals interesting. Okay, so there's a kind of cutoff that the modern business style started in the 19th century. At least it says is described as, again, a bit suspicious. Perhaps the author is going to challenge this conventional narrative. In reality, oh right, okay, here we have it, a change of direction. However, the author is going to say something to contrast that. However, early trading companies successfully purchased and outfitted ships, built, what else did they do? Built and operated, manufactured trade goods, maintained trading posts and production facilities, procured goods. Okay, they did a lot of things and sold these goods both at home and other countries. So the early trading companies did quite a lot of things. What about them? The large volume of transactions associated with these activities seem to have necessitated hierarchical management structures well before the advent of modern communications. So the earlier companies were also kind of hierarchical and maybe, I guess, a bit more modern. For example, we've got some detail here. The Hudson's Bay Company, that's right, Canada, right? Each far-flung trading outpost was managed by a salaried agent, sounds professional class to me, who carried out the trade with the Native Americans, managed blah, blah, oversaw the post workers. One chief agent, okay, that's a hierarchy, answerable, and then the court of directors, so that definitely seems like a hierarchy in that company. I don't know what they were doing in Canada, like trading and buying, what did you buy, furs or whales or something? What's going to be in the next paragraph? The early trading companies did differ strikingly, okay, from the modern multinationals. So yes, there is a difference. It's always a bit complicated, isn't it? They depended heavily on the national governments of their home countries. Yes, that was kind of the colonial era, I'm guessing. And then characteristically acted abroad to promote national interests. Yeah, they probably had the army to help them, I don't know, do some nasty colonial repressions and things. Their top managers were typically owners with a substantial minority share, whereas senior managers holding in modern multinationals are usually insignificant. So that's another difference between modern multinationals and the 16th century trading companies. They operated in a pre-industrial world, right? Okay, so there are more differences. Grafting, what does that mean? Grafting a system of capitalist, I don't know what that means, onto a pre-modern system of artisan. Never mind. Despite these differences, okay, some kind of conclusion coming up. However, early trading companies organized effectively. So the early trading companies were actually pretty modern and merit further study. So, okay, typical academic in the middle of the road, they merit further study, like giving an opinion, but perhaps a kind of measured one, not that strong. In conclusion, this seems to be a passage sort of doing a bit more than just discussing, putting forward an opinion, saying that the old companies were more modern than most people think. Yeah, not such a strong opinion, but certainly the author has a position here. In terms of the structure, we have the first paragraph is about the conventional view. Then in reality, the author gives some evidence to challenge that conventional view. And then the third paragraph is a bit of a balancing act. It says that there are some complexities and of course there were some differences, but gives some kind of conclusion that the early companies were more modern than people realize. Here are those dynamic reading questions again. For this kind of dense historical passage, I had to work hard to find the author's main point. As with most academic topics, things are complicated, so that even if I state the main idea of the passage in simple language, I keep in mind that there will probably be more complexity. That's why academics use words like seems to, or likely, or merits further study. To help my understanding, I used examples. Notice how I mentioned Elon Musk and trading whales and colonization. This is something that correlates very well with engagement and understanding. Advanced readers think up examples quickly. Try this out yourself. Check out the follow-up task below.